All right, everybody, welcome to our webinar. This is the latest webinar in our Alumni Webinar Series. I'm really excited to see so many people joining us today. My name is Bahia Simons-Lane, and I am the Executive Director of USJETAA. I will be moderating the webinar today. First, I'd like to welcome today's speakers, Emily Frank, Kamara Tofolo, and Rob Uy. Thank you for joining us. Today's webinar will provide information on how JET fits into your career path, help you describe your JET experience in a way that employers will understand, teach you how to utilize LinkedIn, and much more. Before we begin, I want to introduce USJETAA, the United States Japan Exchange and Teaching Program Alumni Association. USJETAA is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that furthers the US-Japan relationship by supporting alumni of the JET program. We provide resources for individual JET alumni, JETAA chapters nationwide, and potential JET participants, as well as current JETs. We support the leadership of the 19 US JETAA chapters with programming, membership recruitment, chapter membership, chapter management, leadership, professional development, and fundraising. If you're a JET program alumni on this webinar today and you aren't already a member of USJETAA, please join for free today at usjetaa.org. USJETAA currently runs 4 programs annually. The first is a partnership with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA to provide grant funding to JETAA chapters and subchapters so that they can hold events in their local communities, supporting US-Japan relations. JETAA chapters and subchapters can apply for a second round of grant funding for this program by October 26th. We also facilitate a leadership program funded by the Japan Foundation CGP and CLARE, where representatives from USJETAA visit JETAA chapters and subchapters and hold tailored workshops focused on leadership and growth. Applications for this program are accepted on a rolling basis. Our third program is this webinar series. We hold 2 different series, one for JETAA chapter leaders and the other for individual JET alumni. Thank you for being a part of it. The last program I wanted to tell you about is the Microgrant Initiative, where we partner with the US Embassy in Tokyo. This funds current American JETs so that they can do projects in their schools and communities. The application deadline for this program is tomorrow, October 19th at 11:59 p.m. Check out our website if you want more information about it. Before I turn the mic over to Emily, I'd like to let listeners know that we are recording this webinar and we'll post it on our website for those who can't attend. Please hold your questions until the end or type them anytime using the chat or Q&A features. During the Q&A, you can use the raise hand function if you'd like to ask a question using your microphone. Now, without further ado, I'm going to pass on the hosting privileges to Emily so that she can share her slides.
All right, thank you, Bahia. Let me just, oh, hello, that's strange. Let me just pull up my PowerPoint here, which is, of course, not pulling up because, of course, it's not. Hold on. There we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. I am so glad to see you all, not see, but to know you all are here today. Really glad to be presenting this information to you. As Bahia mentioned, I am also a JET alum. Here's a really old picture of me. After I came back from Japan, I did a lot of different things, but I did wind up eventually going to grad school and getting a master's degree in counseling. So I have lots of experience in the field, and through some grants we have gotten over the past year and a half or so, I've also been able to work with just about 50 of you all in this last, what has it been? I think 15-ish months, which also makes me want to let you know here. Rocky Mountain JETAA has also gotten another grant. We threw this open initially to brand new returnees in the Rocky Mountain region. And now we are throwing it open to everyone. So if you all want some free career counseling with me, grab my email address. There are very, very limited spots left, but definitely drop me an email and we will see what we can work out. Okay, otherwise, what I want to talk to you about today is kind of finding satisfaction in your job. I see a lot of people who come to me talking about their skills. I am good at this. I am really skilled at that. I have been praised for this. And I think that's fine. Skills are not a bad thing. But I think we risk getting too caught up in them. So I want to remind you that who you are really matters in your job search. So, for example, I took a job when I first got back from Japan doing translation work. Some of you will have heard this story from me before because it was horrible and it colors a lot of what I say. I was doing rubber patent infringement translations. Gates and Bondi Rubber were engaged in some apparently very acrimonious lawsuit. I had to sign non-disclosure agreements, but I couldn't have disclosed anything anyway because I didn't understand the English. But more than that, I realized that I don't like translation. I was decent enough at it, but I just didn't enjoy it. It really felt like very difficult labor for me. So really, skills are only part of your story. So one of the things I definitely want to bring up here for us today is this concept of ikigai. I think it's Okinawan. Some of you will be familiar with it. Don't freak out because it's definitely been used to justify karoshi or death by overwork. But I like to think of it with its most positive meaning. So here's kind of what it looks like. You can find other images of this, and there are a whole lot of books out there being written by people on the topic. But you'll see that what we're really looking at here is these four very essential elements. I apparently can't count. So those elements are what you love, what the world needs, what you can get paid for, and what you're good at. And I think if you can figure out how those four things overlap, you are well on your way to coming up with a career path that's going to be deeply rewarding to you and to the world. And when I say rewarding to you, I don't necessarily mean that everyone's going to get rich, but I think we can figure out a way where you can make a living that you feel comfortable with and doing tasks that you deeply and profoundly enjoy. Now, I say this like it's easy. It's not easy. This is going to take a lot of hard work, a lot of determination, a lot of gamon, but that is what we are all good at, right? And so let me know if you have specific questions about kind of how this might play out in your life, because this really is very important and worthwhile work to do. Otherwise, you risk sitting in a law firm in a cubicle with a dictionary and a whole bunch of people around you doing translation work about rubber bandwidths and other things that you hate. And it's really not worth it. Part of the reason I really wanted to do some career counseling with JET alumni is because I've been there and I know how painful it is. And I know what the specific struggles are of coming back from having lived overseas. So what you have to offer the world is really uniquely yours. We each have these wonderful gifts, and it's really worth you sort of stopping and taking the time to figure out what those gifts are and how they're going to play out in the world. And if you are really struggling to figure out how to make enough money doing something that fuels you, let me know, because what we can figure out is how these things overlap here. And one of the things I really like about this particular, you'll see this is from the Toronto Star, this particular Ikigai graphic is that it gives areas where a couple of things overlap, but not all of them. So for example, you can easily find something that gives you delight and fullness, but no wealth. And I definitely don't want that for you. You've got enough skills and enough really great stuff to offer the world that we can figure out a way to really help you make a living doing stuff that you find really satisfying and deeply rewarding each day that you do your tasks. So here's me. My contact info is right here. Again, if you have very specific questions about this or would like to sign up for one of those few remaining free JET AA career sessions, drop me an email, emily@denvercareercatalyst.com. You can call me too, but I'm not very good at answering my phone. You can check out my webpage. And you can tell me how much you enjoyed my Studio Ghibli themed little goofy presentation here. I will also be more than glad to answer your questions at the end of today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. That was really informative. And for those of you who have specific questions at the end about your careers and whatnot, you can ask her at the end. I am now going to pass over the host privileges to Kamara so that she can share her slides and share her insight that she has related to LinkedIn.
Great. Thanks so much, Bahia. Can you see my slides okay?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, good evening, everyone. It's great to be here with you all, and thank you, Emily, for a wonderful presentation and an inspiring presentation. So I'm going to get into some more of the practical side of basically marketing yourself, marketing your story, and your time on JET so you can stand out. And particularly, we're going to take a look at LinkedIn. So quickly, a little bit of an agenda. I'll just introduce myself. We'll talk about Natsuka-sh, now what, how to share your story on LinkedIn, and forget the Q&A, we'll have that at the end. All right, so a little bit about me. I am also a JET alum. I was in GUMA from 2007 to 2008. I'm now a certified coach, as well as a resume writer and LinkedIn expert. I have been featured in some mainstream media like Forbes, The Muse, Mashable, Business Insider, and Inc. I'm Canadian, so I feel particularly honored to be with everyone at USJETAA. And I work with clients from all over the world. And as well, after working with me, my clients tend to get interviews in a matter of weeks, which is really thrilling for me. So, JET, oh my God, Natsuka-sh, now what? You traveled to the other side of the world and you are forever changed. I bet when you returned, you realized that no one could relate to the amazing life-changing experience you had. And perhaps you left a career to go to JET, that's what I did, or maybe you're unsure of how to break into a new one now that you're back. So what comes first? First, you really need to get clear on what you want to do going forward. Consider working with a career coach like Emily. That would be the perfect opportunity. Number two, you really need to get clear on how JET supports your current career direction. And you need to make sure that you're speaking the right language. We'll get into a bit on transferable skills. And when it comes to your resume, LinkedIn, cover letter, you need to avoid JET jargon. What is an ALT really outside of JET language? And finally, you need to market yourself. And you can do so on LinkedIn, as well as your resumes, cover letters, and during your interviews as well. So let's talk about the many, many transferable skills that you have after being a part of JET. They might not be entirely obvious, but here's some food for thought. So your classroom teaching, I don't see it just as classroom teaching, but perhaps facilitation or training, definitely a lot of public speaking and presentations, as well as leadership. It's not easy to keep control of a 30 to 40 kid class. Maybe internationalization really can help you with your cross-cultural engagement or communication and sensitivity, as well as community outreach. Team teaching, that's not easy always. That's a good way to exhibit your collaboration skills, as well as your ability to engage cross-functionally with another teacher. And perhaps lesson planning. Of course, that takes planning. And presentations when you're delivering those to a class, as well as coordination. And maybe you helped with speech contest preparation. Or if you were a CIR, you may have coached some folks at the prefectural office on media or engaging also cross-culturally. So that would involve coaching as well as mentoring. So there's a lot of transferable skills that you can pull from your JET experience. Let's specifically get into how we can share your story on LinkedIn. So how to leverage LinkedIn and why? It's a critical marketing tool to highlight your story and personal brand. LinkedIn is not an online resume. In fact, far from it. It's where you can really engage and show your human side. Online presence is important. Even if you're kind of anti-social media, future employers will expect to see some sort of online presence when they Google you. So at the very least, a LinkedIn profile is really, really helpful. And like I mentioned, it's more engaging than a resume. So how do we tackle this thing, LinkedIn? First, I want to throw this concept out to you called the WWW approach. So what does each of the W's stand for? The first one stands for warmth, which is really showing your human side and telling your story. Second W is words, and that's where you want to use keywords or key search terms. The third W is wins, or highlighting accomplishments and strengths. So when we're using this approach on our LinkedIn, and let's say we're short on time, what we want to do is really focus on building up a few key components of our LinkedIn profile. So 1, our headline. 2, our summary. 3, our experience. And finally, 4, our skills. And I'm going to dig into each of these in a little more detail. Before we get into all that good stuff, I just need to talk about profile pictures. Profile pictures are really important, and it's a way to really give that human feel on your profile. Profile pictures are an absolute must on your LinkedIn profile. If you don't have a picture, it's considered a little suspicious. And so we aren't going for any selfies here, and certainly no travel photos. We want these to be professional looking photos to give us a professional looking profile. And you don't have to pay money to actually have this picture taken. All you need to do is have a friend or family member take it, and you want to wear your usual professional attire, stand against a neutral background, look at the camera and smile. But be very careful of the specifications that LinkedIn requires for your profile photos. They post them online. So as you can see, my photo shows up without any issue, but this person down here is just a piece of a pie. She didn't follow the specs. Okay, so let's talk about your headline. This is where you really want to use your words, those keywords that we were talking about before. Headlines are also an absolute must on your LinkedIn profile. You only get 120 characters in your headline, so you really need to use them wisely and strategically. You want to make sure that you get people to want to click on your profile and read more. So a way to figure out what to put in your headline is including keywords for things that you want to be found for, or things that you are an expert in, given, say, your new direction now that you've returned from JET. And a great way to do this is to reverse engineer it. What would future employers search to find you specifically? So as we can see in these two headline examples, this person has a terrible headline, stubborn at me, couldn't even spell stubborn properly, but then this person has a really strong headline indicating that they're a financial and administrative executive and where their strengths are: organizational vision and charting a path or creating a path and vision towards business growth. So a big difference between these two. All right, let's get into your summary. The summary is a big one, super important on your LinkedIn profile. You get 2,000 characters, so you can really say a lot. This is where you tell your career story. So what goes in the career story? Here are some prompting questions to kind of get the creative juices flowing. What are you passionate about? What are you known for? Who do you love to serve? And how did your time on JET give you some career clarity? And no summary is complete without a call to action to connect. So you ask people who are reading your profile to connect with you. And also what you want to do is include your email address at the bottom of your summary. The reason for this is because if a recruiter or a hiring manager is trying to reach out to you, but you're not connected on LinkedIn, they have limited means to actually reach out through the platform. So by giving your email address, you make it much easier to connect, and you definitely increase your chances of potentially getting an interview. Let's talk a bit about our professional experience section, specifically how we talk about our role and our time on JET. So you really want to highlight stories that validate your top strengths. Did you mentor a student to win a speech contest? Did you get your school interested in English again? Did you perhaps juggle varying class levels and sizes? And what motivated you to do JET? And perhaps how did JET help you clarify your career path? And finally, how do you think JET uniquely positions you to add value in your new career direction? Finally, let's hop into the skills section and take a closer look here. This is where you want to consider those many transferable skills that we were already looking at. You'll want to be as specific as possible with your skills as well. And don't forget the soft skills, like leadership, client services. As well, in your skills section, this is where you want to focus on those keywords, those things that you want to be found for. On LinkedIn, you also want to prioritize your top 3 skills. They get the most and best real estate in your skills section on LinkedIn. And you get to list as many as up to 50 skills. So you'll want to make sure that you use as many as you can. And finally, for your skills, don't bother assessing them. So excellent communication skills, there's no place for that on LinkedIn. Just say something like presentations, public speaking, or something like that along the lines of communication. So I want to challenge you with an action item. After this call today, I want you to think of 3 strengths or skills that you gained or enhanced during your time on JET. And then consider and write down 3 stories that really highlight and validate these strengths. If you'd like to get in touch with me, I am Chimera Toffolo everywhere on the internet, except Facebook. I don't use Facebook. And so that's it from me. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Chimera. That was really interesting. I definitely learned a few things that I did not know. For those of you who are interested in more of Chimera's information, if you follow her on LinkedIn, she posts a lot of really great content, videos, and stuff all about this. So I encourage you to check her out on there.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna give Rob host privileges so that he can share his slides. And sorry, Rob, let me unmute you. Oops, okay, sorry, Rob, you should be unmuted now.
Yep. Or at least that's what it's telling me.
Alrighty, you should be able to show your screen now.
All right, hopefully everybody's able to see that. Thanks, Bahia.
We can see it.
You. Excellent, thanks. Well, thanks everybody. It's really fun to be able to join this evening. It's also it's great for me to be able to hear the other presentations as well. And I definitely think we'll have an opportunity to emphasize some of the things that we've heard. My name is Rob Wee. I was a JET way back in the day. And I will apologize right away. The transitions title that I use here is sort of the generic one that I do when I'm presenting at events like this. But today I do have a very specific focus, and I want to talk to you about things that that will thread from the things that we've already heard, but really focusing on the aspect of networking and how that folds into the job search. So before I do that, just real quickly about myself. I was a JET for a couple of years. I had the opportunity to remain in Japan for several years after that. And what ended up happening there is I come back after JET and I'd started to look around, talking to different employers, and repeatedly kept getting the question, it's really great that you've been in Japan, that you picked up these language skills, but what else can you do? And I found that I just did not have, even for myself, a really compelling story or answer around that. And so I felt like I need to get some more experience in the space, and then really just be very deliberate and intentional about exploring what I like to do. Where do I feel like my gifts are? What are the things that I feel are the places that I can really add value? So I was fortunate to be able to go back to Japan, spent an additional number of years there. And when I came back, I did manage to, it's very interesting timing for me, I managed to actually find a job as a recruiter. And this was during the first .com, and I realized I'm dating myself. And so it was a fascinating time period. I was working in the Silicon Valley, and it was just the kind of time where, it just really doesn't come around all that often, but being able to work as a recruiter, being able to partner with, and learn from other recruiters during that time period, you get a really interesting view of what companies are looking for, who can be successful. And that's really shaped a lot of the work that I've done since then. So from working as a recruiter, recruiting of course is within human resources, I started working as an HR manager. I've mainly worked in technology companies. I've had the opportunity to work at Microsoft. I've worked at T-Mobile, a company called Intellectual Ventures. And then after many years of doing that, I decided to go out on my own. And during that time period, I was doing some work as an HR consultant, but then also just doing a lot of work as a career transition coach, mainly because I was always that person that people would come to and say, can you help me think through sort of the next steps of my career, or I'm looking to get a promotion, or I'm having some difficulty with interviews. And I really always enjoyed those conversations and really wanted to spend some more time kind of digging into that. So I'd spent some time doing that. I was still working as an HR consultant, but I was finding that I was really missing the opportunity to work within an organization, to work with teams. And so I started to explore a little bit and look around for other roles. And so what I currently do, if you've had an opportunity to look at my background, I manage a team of career ambassadors at Amazon, which is a very interesting story in and of itself that I'm not going to delve too much into here, but I'm happy to talk about if anybody wants to hear more about that. So why do I spend a lot of time kind of talking about the different roles I've had and sort of like the path that I've been on? It's because a lot of the things that we've already heard really come into play here, right? Really being able to take the time, and you do have lots of time, to take the time to really find out what is it that really energizes you, what are the things that don't energize you, and how do you make sure that you're finding opportunities to sort of explore the things that you really love to do. Because if you can do that, then I do truly believe the success will follow. Emily, it's very funny that you use that graphic with Ikigai. I've referenced that as well. And then one of the other things that I like to call out is this quote from Howard Thurman, which I think is a nice summation of that philosophy as well, which is don't ask what the world needs, but ask what makes you come alive and go do it, because what the world really needs is people who have come alive. And so telling your story, being able to actually talk to the kinds of people who are either going to be able to help you or be able to like open doors, or maybe even directly be able to hire you. To me, that is one of the critical skill areas within any job search. It's super important to be able to, craft an effective resume, to be able to use LinkedIn as a tool to be able to express what it is that you're able to do. But there's so much other depth to that. Even looking at LinkedIn, for example, people will hire other people, right, that they know and trust. And so being able to put that warmth, as Kamara referred to it, into your story is a super important part of this, right? Because being able to forge those connections within these kinds of tools and be able to market yourself that way is super critical. So when I talk about networking, I very often notice that there's a reaction for people like, it's a bit of a negative word sometimes, or a negative experience. And maybe, you're thinking about terms like schmoozing or, selling yourself and things like that. What I challenge you to do is maybe think of it in different terms, right? So what is networking? I define it as something that you're probably already doing, right? Which is the cultivation of your relationships. But this time it's much more intentional because you're looking for those opportunities for mutual benefit, right? And that's the other aspect of networking, I think, that you want to kind of change your mindset around, which is it's real easy to kind of feel as though you are trying to ask for something, or that you're imposing, or that you're trying to get other people to help you. And it's not just that. I'd say, shift the focus to try to figure out where are my opportunities for adding value in other places or to other people. And I think it's a much more balanced approach. So that cultivation of the relationships, it is definitely who you know. And the great thing about networking is that by and large, people actually want to help, right? Everybody knows that at any moment we could be in that same position of being, sort of looking for another role, and trying to figure out where it is that you're actually going to go next. So I think you'll find that most people want to be helpful, but you also have to be extremely clear about what your story is, and continuing to network, continue to do exploration, maybe working with career coaches is an excellent way to kind of get that clarity. I want to highlight also that the karma of job search is a real thing, right? And being out there, being positive, helping other people make connections, which again is another thing that you can do through LinkedIn, is a tremendous way to also see benefit for yourself, and keeping that positive mindset, and really looking for these other opportunities to add value. I've listed out a couple of real obvious ways to kind of like get into like different communities, alumni associations like this one, your in-service networks, right? So talking to people who are your barista, your doctors, your whoever. These are people that have broad networks themselves, and that you could plug into in terms of like getting connections. There's social networking, and then there's business associations specific to different career paths or industries that are really important to participate in. But there's also all of the other social things that are happening, right? There's their family gatherings. There's, if you participate in a church, or if you go to like different workshops or take classes, every one of those is an opportunity to connect with others who, again, also know other people, and you never know who it is that's going to be able to help you make a connection in a place that you actually want to go. I'm going to focus a little bit for a couple of minutes just on, sort of one of the obvious things that happens, right, which is going to like larger events. And this is where I kind of like shift and kind of talking about this as like networking for introverts, because not everybody is super comfortable with going to like, a large event and quote unquote, like being able to work the room. So what I suggest in those situations is kind of acknowledge that, this is not necessarily something where you're going to get a lot of energy, right? So the way that I'm defining this here is like extroverts are going to get a lot of energy from making all of these connections, and introverts, it's just going to be a little bit exhausting. So network on your terms, create a comfortable environment for yourself, and I can go into some more specifics around that. But set a kind of goals for going into these kinds of events and saying, you know what, if I make 5 new connections, I consider that a success. leverage the skills that you already have as an introvert. And very often that's going to be listening, analyzing, and people love great listeners, right? But you're also going to get a lot of information by focusing on that. And really don't focus on what you don't have, like a job, for example, but emphasize what you do have. And going into this recognizing and being able to talk about either the knowledge or the resources or skills and experience that are going to be valuable to somebody else. So if you're at one of these large events, kind of focus on how do you help other people. And I think if you do that, if you're really thinking about others as opposed to what am I getting out of this, you'll find that it makes it a lot easier. And I've thrown in some, just some quick questions in terms of like conversation starters, easy ways to kind of like forge connections with people that you're just kind of meeting for the first time. And I really love some of these other ideas, like the one at the bottom there, where you're talking to somebody and you're kind of wrapping up the conversation. As I'm meeting other people, if I find somebody that's going to be valuable to you, how do I connect you guys, right? What are the kinds of things that you want me to kind of listen for? And what kinds of connections are you hoping to make? Going to wrap with just a really quick list of just kind of quick hit advice for being able to work like in different events, but these will work, just basically any kind of situation, right? So if you're going to be going to a place where you're going to be having an opportunity to form some new connections, try to find out in advance who's going to be there. If you're uncomfortable just like going up to somebody directly, then have somebody else make an introduction for you. When it's professional events, it's usually a great strategy to maybe volunteer for a while at those events, and you get to know everybody, you're greeting everyone, and you get just kind of accustomed to sort of the rhythm of the event. So when you're actually attending as an attendee, you feel a lot more comfortable. Working on your self-introduction, making sure you bring cards, get there early. Get there before it starts to get crowded. It's always hard to walk up to conversations that have already been established. When I say bring a friend here, you can also bring like an extroverted friend. So having a wingman along who's really into forming new connections and having them kind of help you break into conversations, really easy to do. You're not trying to talk to everybody that's there. Definitely take breaks for yourself. One of the other ways that I think is kind of fun, and I don't have it on here, is get into a line. Most of these different events, there's going to be a line for whatever it is, refreshments or food or something. And if you do that, you immediately have a couple of people to talk to, right? You've got the person in front of you, the person behind you, and you have a topic of mutual interest, and you can kind of continue and thread the conversation. And these aren't things that I came up on my own. I've got the attribution there at the end. There's lots of different resources online for ideas and suggestions for being able to network. But what I'd like to kind of close with is just really emphasizing the importance of forming these kinds of connections. If you were to talk to, I think, most successful job seekers, there's some small percentage, 5 to 10% who tell you, oh, I saw a position online, I sent in my resume, I got a call, I got my interviews, and that's fantastic. There's another, small percentage of people who maybe work with headhunters or recruiters, but the vast majority, 70 to 80%, are going to tell you it's because they knew somebody or because they got an introduction. And again, people want to hire people that they know and trust, or the people that other people they know and trust have introduced to them. And so spending a good part of your time in this kind of activity, right? So not getting into the trap of, I've sent out my resume and I'm just going to wait, but really spending 70 to 80% of your time on forging the connections, getting used to how you tell your story, but really standing out as a person who actually has valuable skills and experience that other organizations are going to want to bring in. So I'm going to pause there, stop there. I know we're going to move to questions and answers, but thanks again for the opportunity. And I look forward to perhaps connecting with everybody after this.
Thank you so much, Rob. That was really interesting. And I do apologize. I mispronounced your name at the beginning. I should have asked you, but we didn't have time. I'm going to go ahead and take back the host privilege, and we will take questions now. So if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function, just type it in there, or just go ahead and type your question into the chat box. You also have the option to click on your name and click on raise hand. And that lets me know that you would like to ask a question in person. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute all of the panelists so that they can answer any questions. And feel free for the participants to ask any questions that you have. It can be targeted at one of our presenters or any of the presenters as you like. To get us started, one question I wanted to ask, and any of you who has feedback can go ahead and answer this, but what advice would you give to either a career changer, somebody, you know, maybe who came back from JET a few years ago and is interested in changing careers, or somebody who may be in a job that they currently hate?
Well, this is kind of my specialty. Hi, everyone. It's Emily here. So one of the things I offer is a very short should I quit my job quiz, which I send out to a lot of people who really hate what they're doing. So a few things I would offer. In either case, one of the really comforting things you can do for yourself is start off by getting what we call a gap job. That is a job to get you over that hump of feeling unemployed or underemployed or really unhappy in your job. So gap jobs are things like retail, food service, barista jobs, those kinds of things. And what's nice about them is that most often, positions like that try to get you things like benefits pretty quickly if you, for instance, don't have a spouse who has benefits, because they don't tend to pay very well. But those are really good places to kind of stop and take stock of things a little bit. And once you're feeling a little bit less frantic about the whole thing, then you can make some decisions about kind of how you want to move on and what it might look like. And I think I would also add, it sounds like from everyone here that you're absolutely welcome to reach out to any of us, and we can give you some pieces of information as we can.
Thanks, Emily. Did anyone else have anything to add to that?
Sure, I have some stuff. So maybe this is more so before you realize you hate your job, or before you realize you want to make a transition, or even after, is to take stock really of the awesome stuff that you've done, even within the job that you hate. And write it down as you remember it, just on any sort of document. And actually, I recommend keeping a running document of awesome, amazing things you've done on the job, or praise that you've received from bosses or clients or even peers. The reason for that is when you do realize you want to make the leap into a new career or into a new job, that's the stuff that you can pull from to create an awesome resume and LinkedIn.
Great.
Yeah, and I would emphasize the same things. I think that's all great counsel, and I think that the thing to really try to do, obviously, is not get into that position, but if and when you do, and we've all been there, is to take away from that experience all of those things that are going to help you kind of going forward. And one of those big things is understanding what is it that really you didn't like, and how do you then minimize that and the opportunities that you're looking at, and how do you maximize the things that really get you excited. I would argue, you always hear the strengths and weaknesses question, and I would argue that rather than think of strengths and weaknesses, think of the things that actually make you feel strong. Like how do you go about your day, and what are the things where you notice that your energy is really high, and what are the things, if you want to call it a weakness, what are the things that drain you, and so how do you then make sure that you're spending your time on the things that really strengthen you, as opposed to the things that really take away your energy.
Great, thanks, Rob. Before we go to the next question, I just want to let everybody know that if they'd prefer to ask a question anonymously, you can do that using the Q&A function. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask that you don't want attributed to you, you can go ahead and ask it there. All right, our next question is from Danielle. She asks, do you know any JETs that go for an MBA after they finish the program?
Well, I don't want to hog the mic here, but this is Emily again. I definitely have talked to a number of JETs who have gone for MBAs. I find that there are a few commonalities. So those of you who've heard me speak, I've probably mentioned this before. I find that typically folks who have done JET are kind of service-minded. So an MBA can potentially be a very good fit, but I would say, I would caution you not to dive into an MBA without being very clear about what it is that you want from it and what you would gain from it, and how it's going to work within your values. Because regardless of everything else, if you are in a role where you're working outside your own values, it's not going to work for you. You're going to wind up being unhappy and kind of questioning the whole reason you did it. So take stock of that first, but I've definitely talked to a number of people who have gone on for MBAs, and I can give you more info if you have specific questions about that.
Does any other panelist want to weigh in?
I will. I personally considered doing my MBA after I returned. The points that Emily made are really, really important. Basically, I weighed the pros and cons, also from a cost standpoint. And I realized it really wasn't for me. And that also, to Emily's point, was during a time where I was in a role where I felt quite unfulfilled. So in hindsight, for me, I'm glad I didn't do it because it would not have been of service to me now in my current career. But definitely, yeah, definitely weigh the pros and cons and do like almost like a cost benefit analysis of whether you really feel it's the right fit for you or not.
Great, thank you. We have another question that's come in. This one is for Kamara. This is from Gil. Hello. He says, I've had a side business since 2010, which I've held onto while working a day job for 4 years while living in New York, and then also while working other day jobs while living in Portland for 4 years. I think this confuses recruiters and hiring managers when they see the dates and locations overlapping with my other professional jobs. What do you recommend is the best way to position or highlight a side business? Thank you.
Good question. I definitely agree that is probably creating some confusion for the hiring managers or recruiters. I would say it really depends. And you know what, I would be very open to just taking this offline and giving you my very specific feedback afterwards. It was Gil, sorry?
Yeah, Gil.
Yeah, Gil, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message, we can take this offline and discuss it specifically. But broad strokes, I would be, honestly, with a side hustle, unless you're filling an employment gap with your side hustle, I would be hesitant to include that much about it. Your LinkedIn should always be tailored towards your current direction. So if you are job searching and your side hustle doesn't exactly apply to where you're headed now, then I would be hesitant in including too much about it. But again, it does depend on a case-by-case basis. Sorry, I couldn't be more specific.
Thank you, Kamara. And Gil, please contact Kamara after this so she can give you some more input. Did any of the other panelists want to weigh in on this particular question?
I definitely agree with what Kamara said. You shouldn't feel necessarily obligated to list everything you've done in any of your application materials, including LinkedIn. And so if it doesn't feel relevant, you certainly have the option not to list it. On the other hand, if it feels very relevant and the other stuff you're doing doesn't, then you have the opportunity then to list only the side business and not the other job. So pick and choose with kind of a goal in mind.
Great, thank you. So Aaron had a question. Aaron, I'm going to turn on your microphone so that you can ask your question, and hopefully this we don't have any technical difficulties because this is the first time I've done this. Oh wait. Okay, Aaron? Hi.
Hi. I wanted to say thank you to all the presenters and also to Vahia for moderating this. It's been very, very helpful for me. So thank you very much. And my question was a little specific. Sorry if it's too specific for me personally, but let's say that you're applying to a company and you're connected with a few of the people who work for that company on LinkedIn or whatever social media. Is it appropriate to send a little message saying, hey, I'm applying to this company. Please keep a lookout for my resume, even if you are not like good friends with that person?
Great. Thank you, Erin. I'm going to go ahead and mute you again while the panelists take your question.
Okay.
Okay, I'll jump in if that's okay. It's Kamara. So it's absolutely acceptable to message them. What you need to make sure you do is consider your actual message to them. What would probably be better received would be if you were to ask them if they had a moment, say, for a short call for any advice or insight about the company. And rather than asking them to keep an eye out for your application, more so having a warmer engagement with them, building an actual relationship and asking them for their expert advice into an insight into the company, its culture, and using it more as a learning experience rather than a request for them to push your application through. Does that make sense?
Thanks, Kamara. I've muted Erin. But do any of the other panelists have some advice about this same topic?
I'll jump in. So I would absolutely agree with what Kamara just said. I think you definitely want to make sure that you're building the relationship, and I think it's an excellent way to get the information about that. And then over time, if you're feeling like you've built up that connection and they have a good understanding of you, and then maybe also a good assessment of whether or not you would be a good hire at the organization. Many companies have employee referral programs that make it easy for employees to say and introduce somebody from the outside and say, look, this is somebody that I've gotten to know and that I think may be good for these roles that we have. And so you can possibly get them to be able to kind of introduce you to those systems. And very often those have like shorter queues or shorter response times for recruiters because we've already gone through a bit of a get to know you sort of process.
Thanks, Rob. Good advice. So we have another question from Tiara. She asks, for someone who feels underprepared to move home and break into their career, would it be financially wise and practical to go back to school?
Well, I'll jump in on that one if that's all right. So Tamara, yes and no. One of the things I've seen a lot is people who are using an additional degree to sort of try to hold back the inevitable. So if you have a very specific reason for wanting to go back to school, if there is maybe a particular certificate you hope to gain or something of that nature, if you always dreamed of, say, law school and now have that kind of more specifically in mind, in that case, it certainly can be a good move, but you're going to have to figure out kind of some of what you want and need from your career path next anyway. And I would recommend generally that before you make an expensive decision like additional schooling, that you take stock of your needs and what you hope to gain from it. Obviously, I did wind up going back to school after Japan, but it took me about 10 years and a lot of figuring out what I would gain from it. So I would say proceed with caution.
Emily, I think that's really good advice. This is Bahia. I'm just going to weigh in on this one as somebody who got her master's and then almost done with my PhD. That's a lot of schooling. And I am really glad that I did not go to grad school immediately after the JET program. I ended up working for about 5 years, well, maybe like 3 years, because then I started doing my grad program part-time. But I think it's really helpful to, even if what you're doing is not what you think you're going to be doing for the rest of your life, you can learn a lot by coming back and working in whatever field it is. I learned a lot about what I didn't want in a job. I learned a lot about what makes a company dysfunctional. And then by the time I went back to school, I really kind of knew what I wanted out of the experience. And I was able to make decisions and do it in a way that was not going to be a financially undue burden. So that's my advice. I usually recommend come back, work for a year or two, even if it's not what you think you're going to be doing. And while you're doing that, you can figure out what your next steps are. And school might be the right answer, but it depends on what you want to do. Okay. Does anyone else have any more questions? We only have a few more minutes left. So if you have a question, now is the time to ask it. I had another question as well that's relevant to this discussion. So if somebody doesn't know what they want to do, how do you recommend they find that out?
Good question. I recommend, this is going to sound really biased, in a perfect world, I would recommend you find some kind of career counselor to work with or career coach, because it can be very tricky. But if you don't have the room to do that, then take stock. There are a lot of values assessments that you can find for free online. Start there. There is a website that I use a lot with my clients. It's called ONET, O-N-E-T. It's actually a government website, and one of the things that the ONET offers you is a free quiz. It's called something like My Next Move, I think. And it's a really nice quiz to take if you're feeling really unclear about everything. It's pretty basic. But really great information on kind of what kinds of jobs are out there. You may not wind up with kind of exactly the right fit from a basic quiz like that, but it will give you a sense of at least a beginning direction. And beyond that, some of it honestly is a tiny bit of trial and error. Hopefully not too much, but it's hard to know. For instance, if you're going to like translation, unless you've actually sat in a room and done translation. So try not to put all of your eggs into one basket as well, or you'll just kind of wind up being heartbroken by the process.
Thanks, Emily. I think a lot of people, when they come back from JET, they feel like they have to have all the answers about what they are going to do next. And I think most of us didn't when we came back. And definitely that trial and error, doing a job that you are not sure about or that you think you're going to like and it turns out you don't like, those experiences are so valuable for figuring out your career path. So don't be afraid of picking the wrong job. You'll learn a lot from that job, even if it doesn't end up, fitting in with your long-term career.
Thanks for putting that in, Danielle.
Oh, yes, thank you. mynextmove.org/explore/IP. I think all the panelists and attendees should be able to see that, but I'm reading it for people who watch this on the recording. I have one more question, unless we get any other questions from the panelists. We're just about to wrap up, but this question is for Rob. So Rob, where do you go to network? How do you find these networking events?
How do we find the networking events? I think it's going to depend on your interest, but I also would say that pretty much any opportunity to connect with somebody else is networking, right? I mean, it's like all of those things are opportunities to build relationships. But if you wanted to, if you've got some idea of what it is you want to do, professional associations are going to have different events and workshops. So that's one obvious way to go about it. There's going to be, just talking with, other colleagues that are doing things that you think may be interesting, and just kind of figuring out from them, like, what are sort of the gathering places, or what are some of even the online forums, for example, where people are sharing their expertise. I think there's a lot of different ways to be able to do that. And I would also caution not thinking too much in terms of just events, right? I mean, again, it's about the ongoing relationship building, either making introductions, getting introductions, setting yourself a goal to say, you know what, I'm gonna try to meet like 3 new people this week. And then building from there, because each one of those people is probably also going to have somebody that they could potentially introduce to you as well. And I think you would find that it just kind of like snowballs from there.
Great, thanks, Rob. Well, that's all the time we have. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us in this webinar. Thank you so much, Emily, Kamara, and Rob, for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you, Bahia.
Thank you.
And thanks to my fellow panelists. You all are a fabulous bunch to present with.
Same to you.
Yeah, thanks.
So our next webinar is not scheduled yet, but the next alumni one will be in December. The one in November will be focused on the USJETAA chapter leaders. But please like our Facebook group, our Facebook page, so that you can receive a notification when we schedule our next one, or go ahead and check out usjetaa.org/webinars, which will always have our next webinars posted, as well as recordings of all the past webinars. I'd also like to point out, since this is relevant, we recently launched a new feature on the USJETAA member directory. So now when users sign up, they can check a box saying that they're willing to be a mentor to another JET or a JET alumni. So if we don't have that many people on it right now, since it's a new thing, but if you're looking for a JET who you want to feel confident that they're willing to answer your questions and mentor you, you can go ahead and join USJETAA.org. When you're logged in, you go to the directory page, and then there's a link for mentors. You can click on that, and there's a list of the names of everybody who's signed up who's willing to be a mentor. We're still working on refining it, but hopefully that will be helpful to you guys. All right, so stay tuned for the recording to be posted next week. We'll comment it on the Facebook page and the event page, and it will be available on the USJETAA website as well. Thank you all for attending. Have a great night.
Thank you.